Well, folks, once again, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Captain Boat Builder. This is episode number 10, and I call this one the Deck Cleats and the Carlins. It's just 4 little pieces of wood, but it took an awfully long time to get it correct. I will be showing you a short segment in the very beginning to show you just what you're trying to accomplish, and that will help you a lot as you start to line these things up and get ready to glue them. So glad to have you back, glad to be back, and let's get started with the Deck Cleats and Carlins, episode number 10. So folks, before we get started in the episode, I want to show you just briefly what you're trying to accomplish, not so much with the placement of the deck cleat, because I will cover that in great detail, but it has to do with the position of the Carlins. And these are the inboard, you could call them inboard rails. They're part of a deck support system. They hold the inboard edge of the deck. But the position of these Carlins is very important, and here's what you're trying to achieve. First of all, you want the distance from the top of the Carlin right here down to the deck, or excuse me, down to the bottom panel, right where my finger is. You want it from here straight down to here. You want that the same on both sides. In other words, you want to measure this side over here, you want to measure this side over here, and you want them to be the same. And what you might have to do is you might have to shim this up a little bit in here, or you might have to cut it down. But this is important so that the deck is the same height above the hull in both places. And you want to check that up in the front. You want to check it at the 3 webs as you go to the back of the boat. Another dimension that you want to check carefully is you want to check the distance from the inboard edge of the hull right here. You want to check the distance from here to the edge of the Carlin, and you want to check it right like this, measuring of course on this side, and then you want it to be the same on the other side. And you want it to be the same here as it is here, and also in the back. That's so that the deck is uniform. These are important things to check. And what I found, and you can see here some of the shim work that I've done here. You can see where I've shimmed this one up. There are others that were almost exactly correct, but what I found was when I cut the webs, when I cut these webs as carefully as I could, they were not especially accurate. And part of that is my fault, and part of it is that you're just working with wood. So be sure to check, again, check this vertical dimension that it's the same port and starboard at the different stations, and also check the width of the deck at different stations. I've checked it at the web, and you can see here I've put a little mark for the center line. I've checked the center point between the 2 webs. I've checked it here. I've checked it on the other side. It's off a little bit. I will be shimming it up and bending this just a little bit. And the whole goal is to get a nice, even, uniform deck with a smooth curve. So that's what you're looking for. Here's an example of how the camber template can be so important. Here we're checking the curve for the top of the forward bulkhead. And I've got the camber template in place. This little piece of wood here is the exact thickness of the deck, and I've done a lot of careful grinding and sanding, and you can see it slides right across, and the margin is just about right. Also, I wanted to show you, and this is quite important for setting the Carlins and the deck cleats. You notice how, again, this is simulating the deck. You notice how it sits down inside the top sides. So we have the top sides right here. That's the top edge of the top sides, and this is where the deck is going to sit, and it's going to butt right up against this, and this should be flush. So by the time you get it all sanded, it's going to be completely even. So you can clearly see that using the camber template is very good as an indicator to make sure that this is sanded down correctly, that the angle is correct, and that the deck is going to fit right up against the top of the top sides. This is just a little footage of dry fitting the cleat. This is the cleat that connects the top of the top sides to the deck. The deck will be laid on top of this. You can see how many clamps I've used. This is to get it nice and uniform, straighten out the curve. The curve on the side is pretty darn good right now. I did want to show you that as I've dry fit it all along the edge, I've been very careful to be sure that the cleat right here is set at the correct level so that, again, that the deck is going to be flush with the top of the top sides and also with the top of the web, which I have worked on just a little bit. So at each point, the two webs, and also at the forward bulkhead, actually 3 webs in the forward bulkhead, you want to make sure that you have a nice fit. I've also marked it here with the red mark so that when I get ready to glue it, I can be sure that it's exactly correct for the whole length. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting screws in here, all along here, little sheet metal screws, and I'll use the screws to hold things together until the epoxy sets up. So now the port deck cleat is complete. It's glued in place. It's held in place right now temporarily with these little sheet metal screws. And as a reminder, if you wait about 5 or 6 hours, the epoxy will be set enough that you can pull the screws out without upsetting the bond. But if you wait longer than that, you may have to actually drill these screws out. So don't forget to take them out after about, I don't know, about 5 hours ought to do it. One thing I did want to show you here is that if you look at this side of the boat, if you look closely in the area where the black arrow is pointing up, you can see how much topside material is above the deck cleat. Now that's all going to be sanded smooth when the deck runs into the topside. But there are going to be places where it's actually higher. If you look down here, you can see that the topside's sticking up a lot less. The trick is to get the cleat set so that the absolute minimum is what you need for the deck to meet flush with the topside. And what you'll see is that these cleats, these mahogany cleats, do a lot to smooth out the curve in the side of the boat. They make a nice fair curve, and they will compensate for the differences in the deck. I should say not the deck, in the differences in the topside height, which will eventually be cut down. But the trick is to get the cleats based on the height of the webs and the deck material on the webs, is to get them all straight and to get the curves nice and uniform. So we've got the cleats finished, and now we're going to head on to the rest of this construction. I want to show you something that I just recently figured out, and it's not all that complicated, but I'll have to admit I was surprised it took me so long to understand it. This is the top of the forward bulkhead, and you can see clearly that it has a nice gentle curve to it as it goes from one side of the boat to the other. And this curve matches the curve on the camber indicator. This is the camber gauge that I've been talking about so much. So the deck in the front of the boat here has a nice gentle curve to it. And for the longest time I was thinking that the deck down the side, which as you can see is quite narrow, it goes here from here's the top side panel, here's the cleat, and here's the Carlin. And as you can see, that space is not very much. And so the idea that somehow you're going to have a camber in that part of the deck, an actual curve, I think is almost impossible, because in order to have this narrow section of deck curve, you'd have to have a center section or center support for it to curve over. And since we don't have any center support, this part of the deck, which is really not very wide at all, that's where you're going to be sitting, it's pretty much straight. But you can see how I've used the camber gauge to change the angle. In other words, the deck is lower here than it is here. So it has a slight runoff as it goes from the inside of the boat to the outside. There's not any curve in it like an arc. It's just flat, but the deck is higher here where the Carlin is than it is out here where the cleat is. And so I've been using the camber gauge just to get that slight difference. I hold it in place here with this clamp. It's just hanging. It works pretty well. But what I found when I started checking all this at different points, I realized, I'm going to take this apart here, I realized that what I was running into was because of some inconsistencies in the webs themselves. In other words, what's the distance from here down to the bottom? What's the distance from here? What's the angle? There's a lot of variables. And I found out that the original web that I built, which has this piece of mahogany as the edge, this web was actually too low. And so what I had to do was I had to build it up with a small little piece of plywood on the back side, and this is the correct height for the Carlin. So the Carlin is not going to be resting on the top of this, which is just a little bit too low. The Carlin's going to be resting here, and all this extra space will be taken up with a mixture of wood flour and epoxy. So as you go through the boat, if you don't want your decks to be completely flat, if you want them to have a nice roll to the outside, slightly higher on the inside than they are on the outside, and if you want them to follow the camber template, you'll have to check each one. And some of them actually turned out correct, but most of them had to be built up just like this one. And you can see there's another one that I had to build up because the top of this cleat on the web is actually a little bit short. So the Carlin is going to rest right in here. So here we have one of the Carlins in position. This is the dry fit stage. Here, I've got the little support pieces that are glued underneath. A couple of good sized screws holding it in place. This is all going to be glued on all sides. I've used these large C-clamps as a way to hold this down and position it left and right. And got a couple of just regular spring clamps here at the back. And you can see that each one of these is screwed into position. And this will be what's going to hold it while the epoxy sets up. I'll be doing that a little bit later. But I hope you can see from these pictures that we have a pretty nice curve, both with the in-wales, or they're also called the deck cleats, and then we also have the Carlins on the inside. So I think this is setting up to be a nice, smooth deck. I'm quite pleased with it. I'll be doing the gluing, and then I'll be able to show you the final result. One of the things that's constantly being stressed in the instructions as you proceed from one phase to another is to keep checking the hull for twist. And now that I've got the cross pieces removed that connect and stabilize the webs, and I've got the deck cleats and the Carlins installed, and this phase of the boat is finished, you can see that I've got a center line string, and I've got 3 pieces of mahogany across the boat sitting at the web positions on top of the Carlins. And to my eye, they're all parallel. So I'm quite pleased that it looks like I have almost no twist in the hull. So again, folks, here we are with the deck cleats and the Carlins installed. Looking pretty good. Hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been a very tedious phase of the construction. I hope I've been able to help you a little bit, and I'm looking forward to the next phase. So once again, thanks for watching. So long.